Hello and welcome everyone to the next session in our timeline, the Journey of Azoove. Today we are joined by Daniel Milo. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. The founder and CEO of Timeless Toucan, a USA-based indie game studio. He'll be sharing his incredible story of how he started Azoove as a small indie studio and grown to be a well-known studio in his space. Daniel will walk us through the challenges and triumphs he faced along the way, giving us an inside look at the reality of building and growing a creative project from the ground up. This is a fantastic opportunity to gain valuable insights from Daniel's journey that could help guide your own path. And remember, feel free to ask any questions during today's session to make the most of your experience and expertise. Without further delay, Daniel, the stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Let me just set up the tech for a bit. Okay. Can people type in the chat and say hi? Just so I can see that I can see chat. We're gonna have a lot of questions. Hi, everyone. Hi. All right, perfect. So, let me just start with introducing myself for a bit. I am a self-taught software engineer and game designer. I started in high school by teaching myself how to code just using the internet. And after a bunch of years doing, software engineering and various things, I ended up starting Timeless Toucan and releasing the game Azoove. This is the second game I released, one before. And actually during the beginning of making Azoove, I also worked at Microsoft in the mixed reality department. I really like water, so I'll be taking a lot of sips of water during this. And you should too. All right, let's talk about the game. What is Azoove? Azoove is a co-op card roguelike about overcoming limited communication, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then there's an ill-fated save the world road trip to see the cursed book. It's designed as a board game, so essentially you can play it on board, but it is a video game. It's specifically useful as a video game because it's easy to distribute. It's also nice because you can play with your friends across the world and so forth. The team that made the game was very small and very diverse from a bunch of different countries. And I think that's partially a bunch of the magic in game development, that you can have people from all over the world could collaborate very basically effectively. The last thing that is important to note is that the game was self-published, so we never went with any of a publisher. And so that is also a note to, I guess, question if you're interested later. Let's talk about limited communications. So there is something that is known as the commander problem. Let me give you some background. As game designers, there is definitions of problems that are called cursed problems. Cursed problems are problems that are inherent to games that have some set of features or some set of conditions, and these cursed problems are unsolvable. That's why we call them cursed. The commander problem in particular is a problem where in a turn-based, cooperative, full, like unrestricted information game, there arises sometimes a commander, someone who is going to take over the session and tell everyone what to do. And that's very bad because it takes everyone else's agency away, it takes everyone's enjoyment away. I will admit that I have been the commander sometimes, especially when playing board games. So when I was trying to solve this problem, you have to fix one of the three conditions to create the commander problem. So You can either make the game real time, which I didn't want to do. You can make the game not cooperative, which I didn't want to do. And you can restrict the information known to every player, which I did want to try. So I did. And so the way this works is that in Azoove, it's a card game where each player draws a hand of cards, but only they can see what cards they have. And the game rules and the game kind of asks players not to share this information with each other. That's against the rules. And so what ends up happening is that players need to play the right card, but they don't know what the other players are going to play. And so to communicate, they pass cards to each other to give each other information. Now, the reason this initially was prototyped is to create information disparity and allow every player their own information and their own plays without anyone influencing everyone else. But what actually ended up happening is that this mechanic created a very unique co-op experience where my players specifically were commenting about this part of the game, that it was so special and interesting that the design kind of drifted towards that aspect of the game very, really, really strongly. Out of curiosity, there is, I'm going to do a pop quiz. There is a way that doesn't solve any of the three conditions for the commander problem to partially solve it. Can someone guess or name a game that solves this problem despite having turn-based cooperative open information? I'm going to wait like 30 seconds for people to type in responses. Meanwhile, I'm going to prepare you to the next step, which is going to be talking about the timeline of developing Azoove. All right. Any guesses in chat? I don't see anyone typing. Can someone type anything just so I can see that it's refreshing on my end? Okay. Okay. Any answers? Any answers? I can see some people typing the acknowledgements, but no? Okay. Well, I will name one answer, which is the board game Spirit Island. Spirit Island is so complicated for each individual to play that it becomes very difficult to become a commander. It's just because the sheer complexity of the game. There are other games that have the same kind of trait. Gambling. Not sure what you mean by gambling. I guess I didn't realize gambling was cooperative. All right, let's talk about the timeline for a bit. If fun responses come in, we'll address them in a second. So this is how it happened. Back in June 2022, I had this idea of developing Azoove. I was playing board games, and this idea for a kind of survival game came to my mind, and I started prototyping it. We made the paper prototype first, which is important. It was very quick, very cheap, and the game was fun from that very beginning. It was fun 3 years ago on paper. And so I started coding it. And in December 22, I mistyped there, but in December of 22, I had the first digital prototype, which kind of worked, but it was very, very, very basic. The game design was still evolving a lot, and it wasn't even close to what the game actually looks like today. But then I was just designing and coding the game myself alone. And I wanted to have a team, and I wanted to get help from people who can do cool things that I cannot, like art and sound and others. So I formed a game studio, and it's not that terrible, especially, well, for in my example in Washington State, it is not very difficult, but managing a business is, and I want to hear your questions about that. Toucan was formed, and I was able to contract a few people and start iterating on the art side of the game and design and stuff. In June, already showing in a convention, local convention in Washington State. And in October, the game was looking so fun and so nice that I actually ended up quitting my job to work on it full time. 4, 5 months after that, the game was ready to be shown at the Steam Next Fest and be released to early access in April 2024, after which we kept working on the game for about a year until the full release. There's so much to talk about, but we don't have time to talk about all of it. So I will be taking questions essentially for the rest of the session until we get tired. I want to hear what you want to know, what you want to hear about, and what is interesting to you. And I'll try specifically to answer questions that are asked multiple times, but also maybe that are liked. So if you can emote on people's questions to give me an indication of what's interesting to y'all, that's how we're going to do it. So go ahead, start typing in questions, and I'm going to actually go back to the timeline slide so that kind of we can focus questions on this and have some information for everyone to look at while I speak. All right, question time is now. Go ahead, start asking whatever you think is interesting. Okay. Okay. So you getting funding for equipment. So okay, so the first question I have here is someone who has a team, a large team, but is struggling to get funding and equipment. I think funding is a kind of a terrible state right now in the industry. It is very difficult to find seed funding for games because it is a very risky thing to do. It's a very risky investment to do before there is a promising product already happening. My biggest recommendation there would be to start with the smallest team possible until you do have something more tangible to show that you can actually have interest and have an investment that is less risky. That will connect to the second question that I see here. Okay, I'm getting questions in direct messages. Can you type the questions in everyone chat, because I want people to help me select the questions that people want answers to. So I'm going to be ignoring private messages from now on. Type them in everyone chat. So I want to just finish answering the question. You have a larger team, but you want funding. I think the main thing would actually be try to go with the smallest team possible. And only once you really get something you can show and prove that your idea is valuable, then you have a bigger chance of getting funded. If you roll up with a group of friends and go, hey, we want to make a thing, that is not enough to entice funding, especially in 2025. I hope that is a good enough answer, but feel free to follow up questions on that. How do you manage time and plan the project? Right. That I do want to answer that one specifically. You can use Zoom Q&A panel. I don't know if I can see a Q&A panel. Okay, there is a Q&A panel. Okay, I opened the Q&A panel. You can use that too. But I am going to answer a few of the questions in everyone chat real quick. How do you manage time and plan the project? I think that comes with experience to a big degree. The biggest kind of, so I'm using Jira as a tool, but I think having made many projects over the years, I think scope and managing timelines is a critical skill. That's a great question to ask because the um, because a lot of projects fail because of time and scope. So I think, kind of related to the previous answer, trying to get a very small, very specific, what we call a vertical slice, a very small version of your game that has the least amount of things in it that proves that the game is fun, and then working up from there, increasing the scope slowly, maybe enlarging the team slowly. So it really is a matter of going about it in a very methodical way, but also it's the experience to know what will be needed and to project the requirements as you plan ahead. Next question, is game development a good path to begin your career with? How do you make up the beginning part of your career? Right, that's actually a wonderful question. I want to give my experience on this one. I think it is important that you ask a bunch of different people because you will see that everyone's path into game development is very different. I will say that personally, I taught myself to code and I do not have a degree. I never got a degree. And what I ended up doing is that I was working on projects for a while, but I actually started in just normal tech. And I worked on like web development and infrastructure and IT because I didn't find games work. And so I don't think it's necessarily required to start in games to end up in games, but you can start in games sometimes. The current games industry landscape is very scarce in terms of jobs, especially early career jobs. So I think you all should consider if you can't find games jobs, consider going to a different kind of work that's related and transferable. And then once you get experienced enough, then you might have an easier time finding jobs. Now, what's important is that during my time in IT and stuff, I was making games on the side all the time. I was working unpaid essentially. I was working on my own projects. I was working with people and I was learning and learning and learning and learning and learning. And eventually I was able to release an indie game. And releasing a game was huge. I had my salary from a different job to sustain me, but releasing the game was actually incredible for eventually landing that Microsoft mixed reality job, for example. So getting stability is just not a thing, but yeah, I think you'd consider um, you'd consider not games as at any point, honestly, in your career, games as a career that is stable is currently in a pretty shaky state. All right. How do you divide and manage game workload with people? I have answered that about production in the last answer. I think I'm going to, for now, skip this. Production, I can get into production later. Let's try to read everything else. I'm going to answer the Q&A. Is solo coding good? Yes. If you like it, there's no real reason that solo coding is bad. Essentially, the more people you have on the team, either you get more specialized or you can build bigger things, but there's nothing bad in solo coding. Are those people that you contracted are popular ones? I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. How do you gain the attention required to bring success to your game? Okay, that's a whole thing, but I guess the answer would be it depends. You want good social media presence, you want influencers and press to talk about your game, and the ways to get there are pretty tough. I can't give you a great answer about this, unfortunately, Anonymous, but it starts with having a great game. Having a bad game does not get attention. A great game might get attention if you do it well. Okay, some games out there which out of nowhere end up as huge hits. How do they achieve that level? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. There's no secrets. Like there's no silver bullet. I did not have this kind of success myself, so I don't know how this exactly works. Frankly, the games that succeed usually in a, I guess in a disproportionate way, like Among Us, usually were released at the right time or released before the right time and then went dormant until the right time came. And it is basically impossible to predict the right time. So I wouldn't model my expectations of a game project after being a hit or landing the right time, because that's just not something that can be done. Is Pygame a good coding language? Yes, however, it's not used in most of the industries, so it will make you good as a solo developer, but not not as hireable, I would say. Which one is better, designer or game developer? It's two different disciplines. There is no really way to compare. If you start your own game development studio, is it better to do your own game engine or use an existing game engine? I would say that generally using an existing game engine is better in the sense that it is much more predictable to be able to scope out the project. It makes it cheaper to produce, which is really good. And there is not much reason to create your own game engine unless your project is a game engine in the sense like if the game's art or the game's style is particularly unique because of a custom engine, then sometimes it's worth it. But I would say by large, using game engines is very good. I come from software development industry, and the using other people's inventions to power yourself up is generally a good thing. There's no good reason not to do so. You do want to sprinkle in your own art, essentially, but not just visual art, but game design as well. But using an engine is very good. All right, typically when you go download the game, you chose a section called system requirements. How do you come up with those specifications? If you're a giant studio, you actually buy a bunch of different hardware and make sure that your game runs on it. If you're a relatively small studio, what I ended up doing is I bought a very weak laptop because I had a hunch that Azoove would run on effectively every machine. And I bought this very cheap laptop that doesn't have a graphics card, and I ran the game on it, and it ran fine, and it still runs fine. I use it for testing. So I put that specification in. I will say, as a game developer, the secret is that these specifications are very made up. If you're a big studio, you have the resources to really do the science there, but most game developers kind of just make it up. They put something that they know works, but sometimes something worse works as well. But it's just kind of like a cover to say, hey, if you ran it on a really weak machine, it's not going to run because it's a intensive game. What is Steam Next Fest, and is it open to any country? I believe it is. Steam Next Fest is an event that runs 3 times a year, and it basically promotes demos for games that haven't released yet. So what you do is that you're about to release a game, but instead you do a Steam Next Fest. So for example, Azoove did Steam Next Fest in February of 24, and then released in April. And what you do is you have a demo and you try to promote your game through that demo, but users of Steam will be essentially encouraged by Steam to check out demos. And so at the Steam Next Fest is very helpful to get a lot of wish lists. I have no exact confirmation that Steam allows every country, but I'm pretty sure they do. I don't see a real reason that they wouldn't. So I would say it is open to any country, unless you can easily check that. It's not country specific. I heard about something like early Steam wish listing. Is it important? Yes. The more wish lists you have around launch, the better visibility you get on Steam, which translates to better sales. So yeah, it is important. How can you effectively promote a game in a short time frame? You cannot. I would say that if you wanted to really blitz promoting a game, you'd want to pay a bunch of huge creators on YouTube and Twitch to play the game, and then maybe have other like news outlets write about the game. But you'd have to spend a lot of money to do that. If you want to do it organically, you don't. Can you explain the difference between self-publishing and getting a publisher? Is self-publishing hard? A publisher would traditionally do a bunch of things for you. And so if you know how to do them yourself, you can do them yourself. Getting a publisher is also difficult, and getting a publisher also means that you're sharing a lot of your revenue with them. So even around like, sometimes it's about 50-50, sometimes it's worse for the developer, sometimes it's better. Depends on the publisher. But publisher has connections with PR, no, they have PR, they have public relations, they have connections to news outlets, they have media, they have a reputation. So if you see a game and the game says on it something like Hooded Horse, that's a publisher that I personally respect. If I see a game published by Hooded Horse, there's a bigger chance that I will consider it a good game, or I'll be interested in it because they have a good name. Is self-publishing hard? Yes, very. I mostly did it because I was going to release a board game version of the game, and having a publisher is complicated for intellectual property reasons. I would say that publishing is a fairly good way to go if you don't know how to publish games. Yeah, that's my answer. What is a game dev workflow and how to manage it in an efficient way? That is incredibly broad. I might come back to this one, but I cannot. I don't know. Okay, back to Q&A. How much of an impact happened from AI to indie game developments? Which things became easier? How do you use AI efficiently? AI for art is, in my opinion, disgusting. I really don't like it, and I do not use it. I think sometimes for coding it is acceptable because it doesn't compromise the artistic aspects of the game as much. I would say most indie developers don't use much AI as far as I can tell. And that is just going to be, yeah, I'm just going to stop talking about AI much. I don't like it, and I think it is bad for games in general because art is cool and AI is not art. How do you approach marketing and community engagement? Okay, I'm going to try to skip marketing related questions because I'm not the best expert on this one, and I'm going to try to focus on questions that are more like design and production. What kind of experience or work should I have done to be considered and hired as a developer in a top tier game development company? Is it a good idea to try to get a job? Okay, big companies should, in theory, hire any amount of experience. The most attractive thing you can do to be attractive to companies is show that you are able to do the work. Make a game, make a thing, have a project, have art, publish things. The Is it a good idea to get a job? I mean, yes. It depends on you and your career and your aspirations. If anyone wants to like talk about particulars that are for them their own like wants and stuff, you can try reaching out on LinkedIn. Maybe I can help on that aspect for some people. Does it have a huge impact on game industry job market? Yes, it's eating away jobs, and we don't like that. What inspired you to find time as Toucan? I started to start contracting people so I can get help making my game. How do you reach a good publisher? Don't know. Is Java code good? Not used in industry much. It's an okay language. Which one is better, designer? Okay. How do you decide to create an effective game? How do you decide and create an effective game plot when creating games? I think the best writing in games tends. Yeah. Okay, this message was edited as I was reading it. Have an idea and clear story about the game, but leaving a hard time. Huh? Okay. Oh, You have an idea and clear story, but have hard time designing levels. I don't know what exact game you're doing, but I would say that there has to be a balance between the game mechanics should make so game mechanics create a feeling, create emotions. These emotions, you want to sculpt them around the story that you want to deliver. So if you want to make a story that is about a slow moment that is taking a while and a character is injured and they're walking slowly, then maybe your levels would be longer and more drawn out. But if you're trying to convey stress and panic and urgency, you might want to make shorter levels, faster iterations, things happen in a different pacing. There's a lot of things to think about, but that's what makes this game development really difficult, right? It's just a puzzle of a bunch of things. The person who wrote this message, if you want to reach out later about the specifics of your game, we might be able to talk about it. But for now, I'm going to go later. Is it better to start in a non-game tech job for stability? If you can afford it and you want to work in games, you can work in games. If you can't find a job in games, then find a job not in games. I would not say it is better necessarily. Um, it's hard to say what is better. Better is a really difficult better is a really difficult thing to qualify here. It is a very acceptable way to work. It won't hurt your games career finding a job outside games. Especially today, everyone gets that finding a job in games is not guaranteed and not available to everyone. So if you are able to find a job outside games to kickstart your career, have some financial stability, savings, and so forth, and then make games on the side like I did, that's a great path. I am happy about it. But if you enjoy making games and you can do that as your job, then why not? How long does it usually take to make a game? That's extremely dependent on scope. So a game that I made alone with a bunch of short-term contracts took about 3 years, as you can see. That game, I would say, is a small game. However, there are smaller games. So when you're thinking about the kind of game that you want to make, you want to think about what scope it is, how big it would be, and obviously a game like a new Assassin's Creed title, for example, takes probably 1,000 human years to make, maybe even 2,000 human years. But they have giant teams, so it takes less time. I would say that the minimum time to make a game and really iterate on stuff is about a year to really get a good commercial release, but you can already have the game kind of working in a couple months. As you can see, I was able to play Azoove digitally in about 3 months of coding in December 2022. But that was just the beginning of iterating design for years and iterating the tutorial and iterating on art and improving stuff and adding content. So, how long does a game take is a question of scope, and it's not consistent between games. What software or tools do game developers use most? I would say the 3D programs, if you're making a 3D game, which Azoove is not. So Maya, Blender. Figma is pretty popular. Code environments like Visual Studio. Um, Project management software like Jira and Notion. Yeah, Git, source control, Git and Perforce is critical. Okay, this is an anecdote. Do not make a project without source control. And yeah, just do not make a game without source control. That's a mistake, and you're going to cry. Back to Q&A. How'd you reach a publisher? Don't know. If my idea competed with one of your games, would it survive? Why or why not? That's a great question, actually. So, if you make a game that is similar to a different game, and it is good, and it doesn't infringe on copyright, so it is similar but not the same. Let's take two games that are pretty similar. We're going to take Valorant, and we're going to take CSGO. They compete with each other because they're live service games, because they're trying to get people to play them forever. But let's take two other games. We're going to take Wildermyth, and we're going to take Fire Emblem Three Houses. These are two turn-based tactics games where you're building a team of characters and trying to get them stronger. Do these games compete? Technically, yes. But in reality, they both create people that love these types of games. And so there's a good chance that these people will play both games. So I would say, do games compete with each other? Live service games, yes. Short, indie, finite games that you play and you buy once and you put down later? No. In fact, you want to work with people who make the same kinds of games to celebrate each other and cross-pollinate and raise a happy community together. Is it a good option to quit a job and go full-time? It depends on your game and your prediction of success and your financial situation. Is Cursor a good playground? Not answering AI questions. What was the hardest challenge you faced while making a game? For Azoove, the tutorial was really difficult. I made initially the game without a tutorial, as you do, and then it was very difficult for my friends to play, so I had to like backseat them over the shoulder. And so I made a tutorial section that was separate from the full game, and it was interesting, but ultimately people wanted to play the real game and not just the tutorial section. And so we folded the tutorial section into the full game. And then that improved things. And so people started learning the game while playing the game. But then we added GIFs and videos to the tutorial to make it easier to understand. And now I finally can say that the game has a tutorial that functions and works well. And that is very cool. How do you handle it when a game doesn't turn out the way you planned? I want a follow-up question on that because I need clarification. What do you mean doesn't turn out the way you planned? Is it when you try to make it and it's not fun, or is you try to release it and it doesn't sell? What mistakes should beginners avoid? too general. I would say overscoping is the biggest killer of games. And yeah, that's the biggest one. I would start with the trying to make a tiny game and growing your game scope a bit one after the other. And that will teach you to avoid a lot of mistakes. Try to finish games. Doing game jams is really good. And as you do these things, you're going to be making mistakes. It's hard to pre-warn people about mistakes because these are mistakes of intuition. You need to develop the experiences of finding that these intuitions are wrong. What's the best platform to get my game in front of a big audience? Twitch or YouTube? YouTube is there so that people can search your game name gameplay, your game name playthrough, your game name something, and find content. And sometimes, if it's a big YouTuber, you would get a lot of exposure just from the video. But the advantage of YouTube is that it is evergreen, and essentially it still exists forever. Twitch, most people don't watch VODs on Twitch, and so your exposure on Twitch is limited to the live audience. However, that live audience might be significantly more engaged with the game. So it depends on your game type. And I would suggest you try both. You try approaching both creators from both platforms and see how your conversions look and see how kind of the numbers look. How do game developers usually achieve significant success? Is it by working for a company or by running their own company? If you define significant success by getting rich, I would say that most indie developers don't become rich, and running your own company doesn't make you rich. I would say that working for a big company does make okay money, especially if you keep going up the kind of job ladder. But if you want to have a really incredible, outstanding kind of results, then a smaller company works better. But it definitely is a slow process, and a lot of founders for successful indie studios have worked in big companies for many years. Do you use any tools for plotting, planning, level design, specifically in 2D games? Paper. I think doing paper prototyping is extremely helpful, especially for designers that don't have the code yet. Yeah, I don't know if there's any tools for planning level designs in 2D games that are not just paper and then try it out in the game and see how it works. As you keep building, you will get a good intuition of what works, and you can use less plotting, less like validation before just doing the real thing and saying that it works pretty well. What platform do you use for developing games, and how do you manage to learn game development and other stuff alone? I started by doing CS 106A and CS 106B from Stanford. It's a computer science course, and it taught me Java and C#. And then I made games. I watched a bunch of tutorials on YouTube, and I kept making games. The thing that really drove my learning was me trying to learn a thing. And so I was learning a lot by doing, failing, and then learning from the failure. What platforms do you use? I use Unity primarily at the moment, but I'm looking to switch. I use Excel for design purposes to do various design tasks, I guess. Like I use Visual Studio as my coding thing, and I use Git fork as my Git client. I don't know if that's what the question is, but but that's the tools I use. Is learning a tutorial and upgrading it good? Is learning a tutorial and upgrading it good? I'm going to read this question as, is like following a tutorial, building a game, like following the tutorial and then continuing forward from that. Um, Good, yes. Actually, starting from something that already exists is wonderful because it lets you have something to build on, and it kind of creates creativity. Because if you start like with a blank slate and you just like make anything, um, it sometimes gets you kind of like locked mentally. I think if you start a project that is already kind of designated for you and then try to extend on it, you get to be creative, but you get to have some restrictions. In general, restrictions create creativity. I'm going to actually go back while I say this. When I solved the commander problem, the reason the game design emerged was because of a restriction. I wanted to restrict myself and design around a specific thing. If I was able to make any decision for the game, I may have made a different one. But because I was restricted by trying to reduce the free communication, I ended up creating something particularly creative, which is very cool. Um, what type of game is better? Advertisement in game and buy premium to get ads free and other advantages, or buy the game like Minecraft? I think the answer for that one is platform dependent. Mobile games, people are generally not willing to buy. And so you want to have some kind of monetization like in game purchases or ads. In PC games on Steam, you effectively never see ads because the people playing these games do not are not amenable to having ads in their game. But you do see games that are free that have live service features and microtransactions like League of Legends, where you buy skins and stuff like that. Um, I There is no better. Again, all these questions that go, what is better, are very difficult. It's very it depends on the game, it depends on the genre, it depends on the target audience, it depends on the platform. So I guess I kind of gave you the considerations for both, but that would be it depends. Java, C Sharp, or C++, which is best language for game development? Java is bad. It's not efficient and it's not really widely used. C Sharp is great. I love it. It's my favorite language, but C++ is more efficient computationally, generally. So if you're trying to make a smaller game faster, you want to go with C Sharp. That's what I do. If you want to build a larger game slower, but it needs to run most efficiently, um, you want to build it in C++ usually. Java is used in Minecraft. True. Minecraft is incredibly old. Very few modern games are developed using Java, and Minecraft Java is unfortunately not very performant because of that. And so they have Bedrock, which has issues, but it's running on .NET. How was your experience in game development so far? I love it. Um, I like the community. People that work in game dev are amazing. Um, the I mean, making a game is awesome. If you want to see something that made me smile, it might not make you smile the same way because I made the game, but go and read the review section on Azoove's Steam page. There are people there who say such cute things about their experience with the game, and it just made me so happy. I guess I like game development and I don't intend to leave. So yeah. Have you ever felt like you weren't good enough to be the CEO of Timeless Toucan? What did you do in that moment? That's a good question. I think I don't have the same experience doing the business side of games that I have making the product side of games. So while I'm confident that I can make a good game and code it well, like design a good game and code it well, I'm not as confident with marketing and business. I think in times that I feel that I'm out of my depth, I go to mentors and ask them questions and try to get advice. And usually that works pretty well. And what part of your personality do you think holds you back the most as a leader? As a leader. Um, I like doing design too much, and so I'm reluctant to delegate design tasks. I think if I was able to delegate almost everything, then I would be doing more. I would be able to have better impact because if I focused on doing the things that have impact over the things I like doing, sometimes that would be better. But I like doing them, so I do them. Um, Someone DM'd me, but we're out of questions. So let's see. The specific marketing strategy. I don't want to talk about marketing. Thank you so much. I'm happy you find it helpful. Um, okay, we're almost out of questions. Do we have more? Let's try to pivot to talking about production. So we had a couple questions about production that we didn't really get to. I'm going to talk about a concept that I call the ratios. And as I talk about ratios, we'll get more questions, hopefully, and then we can answer them. So when you're approaching building a team for a game, you have to figure out the ratios, and I'll explain what I mean. So when you start, you have a bunch of different things that you need in the game. So let's say we're building Snake. Snake is very simple. We need a map, and we need movement, and we need art, and we need sound. Let's say that that's it. And so I put a developer and they start coding the game. And I hire an artist and they start drawing the snake and the tiles and the environments and apples and whatever, right? Then this artist starts asking for help from the coder to put things in engine. So the coder starts working more slowly. And then the composer comes in and wants a different soundtrack for every level. And they go and say, okay, we're going to make 100 different songs for 100 different levels, and we're going to implement them differently, and we're going to have all these different systems. And so they create more work for the main developer. And this main developer is basically spending most of their time whoa, give me a second. I'm going to drink some water. So this developer is starting to spend all of their time integrating and not actually doing their job. And so the problem there is that the ratios are out of whack. If the sound person is generating so much work for developers, you need more developers, or maybe you need less sound for people. So maybe you want them to be on contract for 5 hours a week instead of 40. Maybe you hire a second developer. And so when you're planning a project and you're thinking, whoa, we need like 100 different levels, I better get the level designer right away. And then maybe sometimes in the middle of the project, you see, oof, we need have like 10 more months of level design work, but only 2 more months of sound work, and maybe 2 more months of coding. You have to hire more level designers or maybe reduce the hours of your coders because you're trying to align everything. Everything needs to align. And so when I approach game development and I try to figure out who's doing what and when, it's very important to think about who's blocking who on what. So a good example is that if you're going to have a sound designer that is if asking for help integrating things in the engine, maybe you want to bring them in only after you build the tools for them to work really well. That happened to me particularly with sound, and it happened to me with art, where I was trying to run the studio and design the game and code the game and do all these things at the same time while having an artist full time on the team. And she was trying to give me art to put in the game, and I just couldn't because it was too much. I had to like code different systems to swap the art based on the state of the game and stuff. And so getting to do these things was really, really difficult. And so I had to scale back how much art we're making so that I could do all the coding. If I had a bigger budget for the game, maybe I would have gotten an additional coder to keep the ratios intact. So this is kind of the concept of ratios. I hope this was interesting. I don't know if that helped all these people who are asking about production, but um, try to write down a bunch of tasks and see which ones block each other, and make sure that you do the ones that block as soon as possible. And if you have a lot of blockers, you might want to change the ratios of who's doing what, so that people don't run into blockers. Because the worst thing about, like, the worst thing in terms of like production and efficiency is is just people being blocked and being unable to work. That's primarily why AAA development is so inefficient. Um, okay, new questions. Okay, I'm gonna weigh on the Java and Minecraft question. Let's see what people are saying. Series widely played, enjoyed. Right. So Minecraft is indeed not very. It's built in a way that is hard to optimize, and Java is generally hard to optimize. The fact that it's not very smooth running, especially on weaker machines, doesn't make it a bad game. It is, in fact, the most played game, the most bought game, and it's incredible. But it is true that Java is holding it back in terms of development because it is so difficult to optimize. If they want to add features or change the game and do stuff like the bigger sky limit and stuff like that, it's just very difficult for them. Um, the the point is that is Pocket Edition in Java. But your younger self, if your younger self met you today, do you think he'd be proud or disappointed? Why? I'd be proud. I think that's kind of what I wanted. That's pretty good. Um, yeah, okay. Who are your competitors? I don't think I have competitors. I don't think that's how this works. I think when you're a small indie like me, I have people who work on similar games and they help me. Because if they make good games and I can ride their success and they can ride my success, then we're happy. What are the two games I made? I made Azoove, and I don't talk about the other one here. Um, it's written in C++. So, okay, yeah, Pocket Edition it's apparently in C++. I'm going to trust you on that. That seems correct. That's why it would be optimized. That makes sense. Okay, there was this person who had an idea. Oh yeah, we're talking. Okay, not having names, by the way, is a bit confusing. I have to say. So you who are currently typing about C++, you had a question about level design specifically. Do you want to elaborate on it? Let's try to give you a more specific answer. Okay, how do I? Okay, cool. Let's just do this. Answer now, done. Okay, I'm just going to answer all these questions just so it's cleaning the panel. Everyone go get some water and take a sip. Uh, there was a question, and it disappeared. I don't know if someone else is clicking or what. Or did you delete yourself? I don't know. If Timeless Toucan failed tomorrow, what would you see as your biggest personal responsibility in that failure? I think I wanted to make Azoove, not because it is going to be financially successful, but because it is going to be a game that I wanted to play. And I think it wasn't as good of a it's not it lacks to some extent some market fit, and I think that would have been the main reason that Timeless Token could fail. So we're creating a game that's heavily relying on emotion. The initial idea and the game story is planned out, but doesn't have an idea about how to connect the story to gameplay. Right. Uh, do you have a gameplay planned, or do you have just a story and idea of a feeling that you're trying to deliver? Just a feeling you want to deliver. It's a game design question then. I think tr- I would suggest you try studying different games. Find games that have a similar feeling and see how they how it makes you feel that way through playing the game. But also try to find games that make you feel like you want your players to feel and try to figure out how. A good example is Frostpunk. Frostpunk 1 is a game that has incredible feel, and I tried to emulate it to some extent in both of my games. So by playing the game a lot and seeing how mechanics create this feeling of dread and the feeling of descending into a failure, and the kind of how the game plays with hope, it helped me generate a similar situation in Azoove. When you're designing a game, how do your own emotional experiences shape the mechanics you choose? Can you give an example where your personal life directly influenced the design decision? I mean, the quick answer is that I tend to be the commander and be the commander problem. I try not to, but sometimes I end up doing that. And so it was extremely important to me not to have the commander problem in Azoove as a game. And that restriction that is essentially self-imposed was the catalyst for the main, most interesting mechanic in the game. So I guess, yeah, I guess my personal experience with the commander problem being the problem has influenced a design decision that led for the game being so unique. This was a brilliant idea for an indie game. Thank you. How would you come up with those ideas, like random imagination? How do you execute it as a project? Okay. Let's dive into the ideation behind Azoove. So I was starting from the idea that I wanted to make a game where you work together to mitigate the various problems that happen across the way. If you think about it, it's very much co-op Oregon Trail, right? So I guess the first point in my answer here would be that I take inspiration from existing things, but the core is trying to find a feeling or trying to find some kind of, there's a point, there's like a single point from which the game grows. It's a single idea or a thought or something like that, where I wanted kind of the survival type game, something like Oregon Trail, to make. And I knew I wanted to make it co-op because that's what I want to make. I want to make co-op games. So then I thought about a bunch of other things, and kind of as a game designer, I have ideas that happen to me while I'm playing games or just doing things in life. And one of these ideas that I've been kind of developing on the side, I actually wrote a library in C# to essentially run this kind of thing, which is a card dice, I called it, which is essentially using cards as an interesting form of dice. And I'll explain in a second why this is an interesting game design, but running with card dice was not necessarily because it was good for Azoove as a game, but it was because I wanted to implement this idea in a game. And so I tried it, and it ended up working well. So I'm happy about it. So what's card dice? In Azoove, your hand of 3 cards is just numbers, and that's your energy. So you draw energy cards, 3 at a turn, from a deck of 12, and this deck contains the numbers from 3 to 8 twice. So 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 8, 7, 7, 8, 8. And after 4 turns, you have drawn all of the deck and you shuffle it back. That is essentially the same as rolling 3 d6s plus 2, right? It is. However, it is different. Why is it different? It's different because when you draw a card from the deck, it is no longer in the deck. So after you draw, let's say, 3 turns in a row, you have 3 cards left in your deck. And so that's something that not a lot of Azoove players really realize that they can do, but it is a very interesting mechanic, which is if you card count and the game just shows you your deck, it counts card counts for you. But if you card counted in the board game, you could know which cards remain in your deck. And so in turns 3 and 7 and 11, you know what cards you're going to draw the next turn, which is very important. And so having this like cards instead of dice thing is actually one of the most, like, I guess it's my one of the most the design things that I'm most proud of. And for what it's worth, I'm not the first one to do card dice. Gloomhaven, a board game, is doing the same. They have cards that you draw when you take an action, and it determines how well this action has gone. And a lot of it is oh, yes. So yeah, Gloomhaven uses card dice as well. So it's not like I made it up, but the way I use it is kind of different, and I think that is a part that I'm pretty proud of. So I guess, how do you come up with the ideas like random imagination? I guess they're mostly inspired by things. Um, the that kind of happened to me as I go, right? I have various design ideas. I have a list of, I think, about 20 games that I want to make at this point. Most of them will never be made, but it's kind of a thing that happens after you make games for a while. You just think about game ideas. Some of my game ideas were inspired by some kind of hike I did or walking in nature. Some of them are inspired by a problem I had or being frustrated at a different game. Um, um, yeah, I hope this answered the question, Anonymous. If you want to to follow up, I'd be happy to talk, and if you want to reach out privately also. Happy to. Which language is simple and popular for beginners at code? C Sharp is good. If you want a language that's more high level and easier to learn, it's probably like Python, but it's not the most used in games. You can also use GD script for Godot. That's a pretty good way to start in game development these days, I believe. Yeah. Are you the best game developer? I don't know. I think not. Probably not. It's unlikely. I know a bunch of game developers who are amazing, so it's tough. Have you ever had to abandon an idea because it didn't resonate with your own intuition about how players should feel? My first game that I made when I was in high school, I taught myself to code to make a particular game, like a very specific game, and it was bad. I made the game; it was just bad. So I stopped making it, and I made a new idea. Right. I think there's really no point in sharing the screen anymore. I guess if you haven't looked, at it, you can check out Azoove here. Someone asks, is PYQT6 good? No idea. No idea what it is. All right. If we don't have any more questions, we can be done. I'll give you 2 more minutes to think about the question if you. Are you planning to make a game like Minecraft? No. Why? I don't know. When you say like Minecraft, I don't know what you mean, but like, I'm making different games. I'm not sure what the question is. Right. Any question from someone who hasn't asked a question yet? Thanks for the answer. What are your advices to young developers out there? Like how to execute the project as you imagine, how to get rid of distractions while development. I think you want to pick the stuff that really makes your game shine. So it's kind of a theme in my answers, but you want to cut down as much as possible. So if you want to make um, if you want to make a specific kind of game, you try to answer about anything that this game has to do. Like make a list of types of things that you'd have to make, like visuals here, visuals there, levels, maybe it's mechanics, things that the player can do, things that happen to the player, and ask yourself, is this critical for my game? And if the answer is no, then put it aside and come back to it later. I think honestly, there's a lot of experience required type problems where I too made a lot of pretty terrible games at the beginning, and it just takes a lot of practice. I guess my biggest advice here would be persistence. Like keep making, even if you kind of feel disappointed. Um, with what you actually end up making, it's just because you haven't made them enough. And so you keep making and keep learning and keep improving. And I'll repeat advice that I keep hearing in different forms, but the only way you actually fail is based if you stop trying. Any software tools you use for QA testing? Not No, I don't. I didn't, unfortunately. I wish I had a better QA pipeline, but for a game this small, it's not a huge deal usually. Um, yeah, I don't have a good question for you about QA. Sorry. Effective way to convey your ideas and thoughts to other team members. That's a great question. It's a question of yeah. So you're asking about alignment. I think aligning your team is something that can save you a lot of time. You want to write down stuff, but you also want to try to teach yourself how to explain an idea to other people. And I think an interesting an interesting bit about me that is potentially responsible for my game design abilities and also my ability to convey ideas is that I for many years have been dungeon mastering the D&D campaigns, and so I'm able to explain things um in a gradual way, and I understand how to create a specific picture in someone's head. So, like, let's say you walk into a room, and now I'm going to try to explain the room to you, and you'll figure out what am I talking about, right? So you walk into a room, and the room is dimly lit. The light casts shadows from various objects in the room. In the corner of the room, there's a few barrels and a table that has a few rusty knives on them. The door to your left is a bit ajar, and so forth, right? So like you can start with the door and you can start with the table. You want to like explain your idea to start creating the image in someone's head. So when you try to explain a game to someone else, you don't try to explain it to them like you're selling a game to a customer, because the fun part that the customer sees in a product already done is not explainable a lot of the time. While you're trying to explain something from the core of it, you're trying to approach it with, okay, so we're in this setting and we're trying to convey this kind of feeling, and we do it by doing these things. And you try to build an understanding by giving pieces of information that are easy to understand one by one. How to make agreement about share revenue. Okay, that's a big one. I'm going to come back to it. Is your career good for you? Yes, I'm happy. Okay. Agreement about share revenue. I will going to refer you to my LinkedIn page. I'm actually going to send it right now. Here's my LinkedIn page. I actually wrote about revenue agreements and volunteer work a few different posts in the last couple of weeks. And I think you'd find them interesting. Specifically about agreements, I think you want to consider three kind of major things. First of all, is how you determine who deserves how much. And I'm not going to tell you how. I'm not going to tell you like what exactly is the right way or whatever. And by the way, yes, feel free to just connect with me. Don't worry about it. Don't feel shy. Do it. The second thing to consider is what happens if someone misbehaves and needs to be removed. If someone stops working or does something malicious or is not working well with the team, what's the procedure for removing them from the team? Do they still get revenue? And how do you treat their work that they have done? So if they get revenue, you might be able to use their work. But if they don't get revenue, you definitely have to no longer use their assets and work and IP, which is very difficult, especially with amorphous disciplines like production. So you need to really word it correctly for these people. And then the third thing to consider is what happens if someone wants to leave. I think you want to ensure that people can regain ownership of their own work if they're working in a volunteer capacity. I think it is unfair to demand they leave their IP before going. However, they might choose to. So you need to have this mechanism where people can leave the project if they feel like, can be expelled from the project if the team feels like. And that's a whole story about who's making decisions on the team and who has voting power and whatever. This is a big question that I'm not going to answer. And then the most important thing is what's your mechanism for, assigning shares or assigning percentages or assigning whatever makes the revenue share exist. Consider that if the shares are from gross revenue or net revenue, and what happens when a publisher exists, and what happens when you get funding. But ultimately, I'm not a lawyer, and you should talk to a lawyer. You should really go and talk to a lawyer if you're trying to work on a commercial project for real, for real. You don't have to completely lawyer it if you're doing more of a volunteer learning, upskilling type of project, which I think is wonderful. It's just not as high stakes. And ideally, if you do this, you might consider as well to release the project for free, because it reduces the overhead of publishing and a lot of considerations that you just don't want to deal with as a volunteer, because you're mainly trying to get hired and you're just focus on the product side, and then don't worry about business and money and shares and stuff. But that's a different type of advice. So ultimately, yeah, I would consider these big things. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so this is not exactly legal advice. And so if you really need to make your contract tight legally, you should go to an actual lawyer that understands game law and entertainment and intellectual property, and get a contract written through them. Right. I wanted to address something because I don't know, because I feel like talking about it for a second before we end. So when you're making teams, try to like be cool about diversity. Try to get people from all backgrounds, including geographical, including gender, including um, all these kinds of things. I think the Azoove team at Timeless Toucan benefited greatly from having a lot of diversity in it, because we had a lot of discussions about kind of inserting nuance in the game. And when we tried to make interesting content, for example, two of the four characters in Azoove are non-binary, there was a lot of interesting discussion that could only happen if the team is diverse. So I think for all of you who are trying to make a team and build a project and start studios, you should think strongly about diversity when you're building, because it will make your game better. And the last thing that I want to encourage you to do is to treat games as art and not as business because the players can tell. And good games that have heart and have a lot of art in them tend to do well with audiences. Like people just enjoy them, and you'd see people talking about like, oh, this game is addicting. I keep playing it, and that's like not a great response. That's not necessarily what you want to hear. But sometimes you'd hear something like, oh, this game is like so important to me, and I played this game in a tough part time in my life, and it was helpful. And these people will go and like essentially promote your game to other people, not because it is like addictive. It's because it is good for them. It is good for you to play this game. It's a game that you want other people to see played, and so this kind of result to me is much more like preferable because, well, as a designer, it's ultimately my goal is to make enough money to keep making games, but really the keep making games is the important part here. It is putting out games that people really enjoy, like this one person who made an oil painting of Sage from Azoove, one of the characters, or like the person who, yes, there is a recording, and like the person who plays with their mom who doesn't play games but they play Azoove together. Like these anecdotes are like why I make games and maybe why you should make games. All right, I think this should conclude it. If anyone has particular questions that have particular context, like personal context, you can try reaching out on LinkedIn. You can like message me. Don't worry about it. And I hope this was helpful to everyone. And I hope you have a good day and stay hydrated.
On behalf of LEVELSTAIR and EXE team, Daniel, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and joining with us today. And looking at how many questions we popped out today, I think the participant learned a lot of insights about making their games and publishing and overall about the international game dev scene as well. And we are wishing you and Timeless Token a prosperous future ahead. And thank you once again for joining with us today. And to our dear delegates, that concludes this week's session. And thank you for joining this session and staying till the end. And have a good night. Bye.